Hi everybody, my name is Eugene Hough with the Legacy Marker. The Legacy Marker program is dedicated to preserving and protecting monuments and markers, and in turn engaging communities to participate in those activities, mentored activities, and in turn share and exchange their historical narrative. The previous show and several of the shows recently through the Legacy Marker program was highlighting a very exciting project sponsored by the Pennsylvania Daughters of the American Revolution under Marguerite Fitch, the regent for the state, on a 2-year project to basically uncover and document graves and in some cases preserve. And recognizing it's just a 2-year project and there's an ongoing fundraising process taking place, some very exciting things are happening. But there have been a lot of challenges that have taken place from the standpoint of cars hitting the front wall, compromising the wall space itself, the understanding that there would be need for removal of trees and stumps. And with that being said, just as an update, 3 bids have been obtained by an excavator, a brick and block specialist, and an iron worker, because there's iron rail fencing at the top of the wall itself. And then our Marguerite special project, outstanding of the damage that was done that is insured. That's why we're going to submit those bids. Marguerite spearheaded this project called Buy a Brick, Build a Wall, because we understand that ideally we would like to replace probably 3/4 of the remaining wall since the foundation is compromised. The wall is listing, and it's best that we do this correctly. So with that moving forward, I think some very exciting things have happening, but I want to dovetail back to, for myself, how this all began. And outstanding of Marguerite getting in touch with me a year ago about wanting to make this a state project. I'd been interested in this project early on, but it didn't happen without a proper introduction. And I received a email and then a phone call from Miss Christie Cole Logan. And Miss Logan is a New Mexico resident and has ancestors that are interned in the cemetery. And she took the opportunity, after we communicated, to be in town with her husband. We had a chance to meet in the cemetery. We may have a chance to show a couple of photographs of that and just discuss the challenges. And at that time, we didn't know who the cemetery was owned by. The city didn't have any information. The church wasn't sure. But the main thing is the cemetery direly need preservation and care. So at this point, I want to introduce Christie Cole Logan, who has a plethora of information, not only in terms of her interest in the cemetery from a family standpoint of interments, but a recognition that her family has been in this area for quite some time. And there's some interesting connection through paper mills and some things that may tie in with some individuals that you will recognize by name. So at this point, it's my great pleasure to introduce you, Christie Cole Logan. Please say hello to everybody.
Good morning. It's nice to be with you. My name is Christie Cole Logan, and I became interested in genealogy and family history in about 2012. My dad had been researching for probably 5 years prior to that, and he was stuck on finding the cemetery that it would be my 6th great-grandfather. And when I speak, I'm not going to say 6th or 7th. I'm just going to say great-grandfather. too many generations. He was looking for the grave. And because of the evolution of St. Paul's and 3 different churches and 2 different churchyards, it was confusing. But I did reach out to Eugene. The first trip in 2012, we did not know where the grave was. Subsequently, I found the WPA survey that was done, I believe, in 32. And but I saw an article online about Gene and his ground penetrating radar to discover buried graves. And I know that 4 of my family members are buried there through church records, but only 1 of the headstones is remaining. And so my goal was to find the other 3, and that's how Gene and I met.
We think that it was interesting because when we visited the site, we did a couple things. We first went by the church because I believe, Christie, you had been in touch with some of the individuals at the church to start the conversation. And over the years, they've been very helpful. And their goal also is to provide as much documentation that's available. But we all agreed that the cemetery was overgrown. There were collapsed graves areas. And the plan was, what do we do? And at that time, there was no money available. Obviously, any project, from my standpoint, and I believe Christie and anybody from the DAO are people interested in history, if you're going to do a project, it has to be documented. What's the history of the area? Why is this cemetery there? Who are the individuals based upon the church records and the WPA? But as I shared with Christie recently, with the success of utilizing ground penetrating radar this past October, November, we found out that there's a whole series of unknown interments at the one end, probably southeasternmost section of the cemetery, that according to the geophysicist who did the ground penetrating radar for free with his organization, which we're very grateful for, he indicated possibly 1 to 2, maybe 250 more interments. But again, a lot of those interments were obscured. So from a historical standpoint, 1696, Chester, the cemetery only becoming a part of St. Paul's Parish, 1702. That cemetery was utilized, that's our understanding, prior to that. So who knows? Those are more pieces that are coming into play. So in going to the city, we also found out, unfortunately, nobody knew who paid the taxes. And it was sort of left up in the air, as much as I know that I did reach out to Christie because back in 2000, we met in 2014, was that correct?
13, yes.
13. I was asked to come down to Buckman Village because there was a forsaken World War II monument, and that was a very prominent community in World War II. And I think that's a story unto itself because 1692, 1696, Chester, one of the earliest communities in Pennsylvania, and it was a thriving area. It was a river city. And so the map behind me was a map that was at the Historical Society, and I don't know if Christie has probably seen this for the first time, but it shows the first cemetery on Route 13 and 19, the second cemetery across the street, and then the third cemetery, or excuse me, the third church location is on 9th Street. And I shared with individuals, and Christie, you saw that when we saw the sanctuary. Yes. The original purchaser of that territory where the cemetery, Upland area, his incredible tablet is preserved and hanging on the wall inside the sanctuary. And again, that's a very, very special part of history. But what I did for Buckman Village was go into the community, got students involved, and we went and did a cleaning and waxing of the plaque. And a guy came over and brought his lawnmower. Somebody came over and gave us tilapia fish. And I'm going to get back to our story, but I want to share that there is a very caring and dynamic group of people in Chester that want things to work. And so as things are unfolding, we're here. And now I thought it was very important for Christie to obviously introduce herself, but tell us a little bit more about, you have family interments there, but you also, there's a connection with, I believe, paper mills, and I think also from our local people here in Radnor, they'd like to know you also have some connection with St. David's Church with possibly interment there. So please tell us a little bit more, educate us about your family.
I was surprised to learn how many people of my family were actually there and the excellent records at the Chester Historical Society. And I have to give a shout out to them because they were fabulous. My sixth great grandfather and his mother, so be my seventh, lived right on the corner of Market Square in Chester. And he was a butcher, and directly diagonally across the street was the church. And, you know, he did live a robust life because he was also called in to be a witness by King George to testify about a house that was serving liquor that had not been taxed. And I figured the only way he could serve as a witness is that he was probably drinking it. So he was very active in the church. There are records that support that. When they bought a new bell, he subscribed to pay for that. His wife was Martha Hunter Cole, and her family had settled in Newtown Square. He was a member of St. David's, and he is actually buried immediately out of the front door of the original chapel. Multiple family members are buried in that cemetery. And one of the fun things about him is his best friend was Anthony Wayne, who is the grandfather of Mad Dog Anthony Wayne. And so he has lots of stories as well.
And I didn't know that. I'm fascinated. That's wonderful.
My other would have been my aunt, my sixth grade aunt. She was the sister of Stephen Cole. She was married at Old Swedes in 1726, and the man that she married was Thomas Wilcox. They moved to Glen Mills, and Thomas started with a partner a mill to make paper. I believe the mill was finished in 1727. I want to go back one step. The home of John Hunter is still standing, and it is recognized on the Pennsylvania Historic Records or designation.
What's the address? I'm sorry, can you tell us where that's located?
It's 405 College Avenue in Newtown Square.
Okay.
And if we have time, I would like to tell a little story. I need to go in reverse. When my husband and I went back in 2013, I found the house, and I just got the nerve up, and I just went and knocked on the door. And this young gentleman answered, and he and his fiance had purchased the house, and it was a challenge. But he said, "Come on in and I'll show you around." And he did. He showed me the house from the basement to the attic. They were so gracious. And to walk on the stairs and to walk in my ancestors' footprints was very humbling.
What were their names?
I'm sorry.
That's okay. What were their names? I'm sorry.
His name, my grandfather would have been John Hunter.
Yes.
And his wife was Margaret Albin Hunter. So I have fabulous pictures, some of them inside the house. The walls are about 18 inches thick. I have some pictures of myself with my husband there, and it was a real delight. And I've now kept up with the family on Facebook.
Who were the folks that owned the house when you had the tour?
You know, I would have to get their name, but the important part is that he is a descendant of Caleb Pussy. And anybody that knows about Chester history knows about him. He was a very high-profile landowner at that time. And we can talk about that more later.
Oh, more stories. This is fabulous.
And now the family has 3 children. And so the house is fully alive, and they were working on renovating it. So, okay, fabulous. Back to my other family member, Elizabeth, and her husband, Thomas. They did start, and I believe this, I read a book on paper mills in Pennsylvania, and in that book it says his was the 3rd mill. He was personal friends with Benjamin Franklin. They traded goods. He made paper for Benjamin, and he sold them school supplies for his children. And I have the records showing those receipts. And Benjamin Franklin came to their home and visited. There's a famous quilt that's part of the family collection that shows flowers and a laurel wreath, and the ivy. And the lore is that he is the one that designed for the blanket, for the quilt. Fast forward, he started printing money for the government, and he printed money for the Continental Congress whenever it was going through the Revolution. He had developed what we know today as the threads that go through a dollar bill. And he did this because the British were counterfeiting money and flooding the country with false money, thereby devaluing the money. And it is he that developed the threads that we still have today to protect the currency. So, yes, my family had a very robust life.
I think, it's interesting that I shared with you at the beginning of the project, being a big fan of Ken Burns and James Michener with his wonderful novels. In fact, James Michener had taught up at George School, where I went up in Bucks County, and I marveled at them in getting the stories. And Michener had people go out he was lucky, he had graduate students. They went out and they interviewed people, they got the stories. Ken Burns is fabulous films, but also taking testimonials and photographs and letters and bringing the story to life. And that's what's incredible with your story. And what I wanted to do when this project started, because the city had been going through a lot, Chester, it's had ebbs and flows when you look at it. And that's why we call it the Chester Anthology Project, because it really is. The city has had ebbs and flows and good times and bad times, but it's still there. And it's coming back, even though it's in a dire financial situation. But I got permission, and my colleague Ken Arco, who was unable to be in town to do filming, we found a reputable film crew, and they came in and filmed for 3 days. And I basically had interviews. I conducted interviews in my novice experience of probably 7 to 8 key people in the city, including the mayor at that time and the the city planner, park and recreation, one of the representative for not only the church but with the Historical Society, Chester East Side, which is an after-school program. I'd reached out to the Boys and Girls Clubs and the charter schools on the side. A lot of people were interested in telling their story. We only had so much time. And I also interviewed Ned Hector, who is a gentleman, a black gentleman who is very involved in Revolutionary War history and is interested in the role of blacks during that time. So he was interviewed and came down, and a very compelling interview. And he also came down to the cemetery. So we have some really neat clips. I'm laying down on the grass with my army cap on, and he's in his colonial kit with his tri-counter, and we're looking at the stones, sort of a timeline. But importantly, we interviewed the rector of the church, Father Savali, who's no longer there. He moved on to another position, and then, of course, Margaret Fitch at the very end. These 400 minutes of interview haven't been edited, and we're hoping to get those because in the long run, it tells the story of people who are committed to the process. That's 400 minutes, and you and I have been speaking right now for 56 minutes, and we're covering a lot of incredible stuff. And the beauty is Kevin's taking all this with Studio 21 mainline TV, and he's able to edit what we have here and share it with this wonderful studio. So we have the technology and a key piece coming into play, and that certainly is you. We've shared, or I have shared with you, some of the progress we have made since the fall, and I've sent you some photographs, but we need volunteers. And we have a lot of work to do to remove organic sod and other things from the cemetery, but for your family and the respective history, which is for everybody interned there. We're at the process now to get ready to move these sod clumps. A lot of the stones are only a couple inches below ground. A lot of them are exposed, safely removing their things. So the recent photograph I sent you of the original stone you showed me, now you can see some of the epitaphs coming forward. That's only the first phase of that, but more information will come forward, which is exciting. What are some of your thoughts on this project thus far? I mean, you're in New Mexico, but you're a key component, certainly with your family and history. Where would you like to see the project going? Outstanding, and we do have fundraising concerns. What are some of the thoughts you have?
Yes. Some of the thoughts that I have about it is that each stone that we can recover and restore is very important because every stone tells a tale. And so the restoration is very important. We need to raise money for the ongoing maintenance. Currently, the City of Chester Park Department, I believe, is or historically has mowed the lawn, and we need some equipment that is smaller to get between the headstones and maintenance instead of a large ride-on mower.
Yeah.
And so that's a big component once we get done. I would like to make the cemetery have more of a presence so that when people whiz by on their work and to and from in their daily lives, that they say, oh, look at this. This may be something special. So I think we need more signage. I think we need a more significant entrance into the cemetery, like maybe some kind of an arch, so that people go, hey, this is something, you know. And so also, because we do have one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence in there, which we didn't talk about that, John Morton, you know, it's a very important historical place. It's an emotional place for me, but it's a historical place, and it should be treasured and maintained. And I think it would give the community of Chester pride. And if we can work in with the students and other persons with Widener and get some people involved, I think it'll just raise an awareness. I don't think most people have any idea what that little plot of earth is. So,
and that's not an isolated situation, but I think because of the situation and where it is on Route 291 and 13 and the French marching by there and the river that is right there, and the city is going to come back, and it's a site you can visit. Across the street now there's a very nice motel, there's parking, and the church, the sanctuary on 9th Street is absolutely spectacular. And I think of, I have being a history person, and I know people come to our region, they're in today with brochures, so they go to the Revolutionary War Museum. That's great, and it's downtown, it's in a big box. This is tangible. You're going to be able to, I would say, with, they call them wayside stations, which would be proper signage to tell the story, which would be tied in with local maps. As I've shared with Bob Seelig, and we discussed that, he's the specialist, he's doing research for the Brandywine campaign, Washington Rochambeau Trail, and he concurs, and the big piece is if people are going to come to a spot, let's get information to them before they come, because when they do come, and they come to the cemetery, they'll be understanding that the watersheds, the Schuylkill, the Delaware, and as you proceed into the other areas of Chester County and the surrounding region, if you refer to the Philadelphia campaign and the Revolution, this is a crucial site that I think could be very, very rewarding. But again, it's something that is not glossy, flashing lights or things like that. It is a diamond in the rough. It's a tapestry of time. We're pulling the layers of the onion back because it is lots of historical pieces, and that's exciting. But I think, as you were saying earlier, and I wholeheartedly agree, from an educational standpoint, there's a fantastic opportunity for local youth to get involved, and we're working on that. But I'm also speaking with the local prison to see if we can have safe release for certain prisoners. Because one gentleman said, you know, my kids are on the outside. I'd love to be able to go out in the cemetery and work with them on a weekend. That's possible. Reached out to Boeing and then obviously the Boy Scouts and other groups, but everybody says, great idea, great idea. We need busy hands, and I think, as I say, the table is set. If you look at the photographs and the documents of where we're going with the cemetery, each of the grave sites as we know it are petitioned off quadrants. There's opportunities in those sites to remove the sods and soils, and with that, allow people, because believe me, when you get your hands in the soil and you pull back a layer of soil and you see an epitaph or a stone, boom, you are part of history. And your role as even just a mentored youth out there, you are part of history, and you're a significant participant that we need in this process. We have about 4 minutes left, and I keeping in mind your story, and again, I'm reaching out to other entities to try to dovetail, and I'm hoping that I've complemented that as well as I could. And we're going to have you back, noting that we'd like to try to see if we could maybe do a fundraiser this fall at the Corinthian Yacht Club, and to highlight the Washington Rochambeau Trail for you to speak, and the DAR use that as a spotlight, because if we do it around November, there's going to be a lot of things happening. What are some of your thoughts based upon everything you've heard? And I'm sort of throwing everything at you at this point.
That's okay. There was one thing that I forgot to say that I want to get in before we leave today, is that when we went to the church, we met with Nancy Crossman, and she pulled out the original records for us. And just like going to John Hunter's home, and I also went to Ivy Mills. I got a tour of Ivy Mills. But going to the church and seeing the original records was a very important experience. And I had my dad with me, Scott, my stepmother. And I just can't tell you the feeling that I experienced, and really energized me to get going on this. And the cemetery is a little sad and it needs a lot of love. And I would like to see energy in the community. We definitely need money, old-fashioned money. And so a fundraiser would be great. I would love to speak at it, be a big part of the planning, and it's something my husband and I have committed ourselves to.
And yeah, I think what's important too, because with the 250th, and this is signing of the Declaration of Independence, pre-colonial, colonial, but where this country is now. So I think, I had an ancestor who went out and was a photographer and a researcher, even though he stopped being a lawyer because he wanted to see the West before it disappeared. But your region has a story as part of our country's history, but at the same time, this story here, we should be sharing with your youth out in your sector of the country, and we can do things vice versa. What we're doing here is we can share and show how other communities can take on projects like this, and that's very exciting with women like you and your family, women like yourself and family members, but the DAR, which has chapters all over the country. So we have a good table we're setting. Good things are happening. And so I want to thank you very much for taking the time speaking with us today. And we will follow up on this. And I know Kevin, thanking him again, Mainline TV. He has been instrumental from the very beginning, even before funding was available from the DAR to document these sorts of things. That's the importance of local network cable programs, and I've shared that with the Pennsylvania Cable Network, which is going to be covering a little bit about this project. And I think they're going to be quite impressed with what Kevin is doing here with the board members and Mainline TV. Christie Cole Logan, thank you very much. We'll be in touch.
Okay, thank you. Loved it.